Hey guys, this is Megan Denon, and this is my week 4 video um, discussion for COM3233. And we're talking about media violence this week, and I had a few thoughts about that when I was listening to the prompt and thinking about media violence and Gerbner's perspective, even 25 years ago. I think that one important thing that I think that we have to recognize is that violence is also uh, relative to our situation in life. So, me being in suburban Norman in central Oklahoma, the kind of violence that I'm exposed to on a daily basis is pretty minimal, if any, apart from media sources. Um, my life is pretty peaceful. I like it that way. But there are areas in even the United States or in other countries that, like Syria, for example, or Sudan, where it's a war torn country. Or when I'm thinking of the United States, I'm thinking of places like inner city Chicago, Southside LA, where violence is part of their daily life. And so when we're talking about media and violence, audience, I think, is relative to what we're talking about, because for someone who sees violence in media and then walks out their door and that same violence exists in their life on a daily or weekly or even monthly basis, um, then I think that starts to grade the area of when media violence is ethical. Um, Someone being exposed to something that they live out every day is going to be different than someone being exposed to something that they don't live out every day. And so someone's perception of media violence when they live in Compton is going to be different than my perception of media violence. And so I just think that's an important aspect of the conversation to keep in mind. And audience is important when we're talking about media, always, I think. So I think that it is important that we recognize that there's violence in this world. I think it's important in terms of protecting ourselves from that violence, whether that is literally protecting ourselves or ethically protecting ourselves, in a sense. Being armed with the knowledge of how we get into those situations, whether it be on a grand scale like war or on a very small scale like in home domestic violence. And so, under the right direction of exposure, I think that those things are important to acknowledge and important to come up with ways to have discussions about that violence in a way that can hopefully prevent it from happening to you as an audience member and those people that are around you. And so I think there is grounds for media violence in terms of exposure to it. I do think that the media has gone off the deep end with their media violence exposure, and I don't even know that there's necessarily anything that we can do about that as a society at this point. It's kind of a situation for me where I don't really see a solution where we reel that in at all. Media intake is so personalized nowadays, and most of the time people are paying for it. Again, that's relative to audience, because people who can't afford to pay for their media consumption are left with whatever is being broadcast on television at this point in our technological society. I think that that could easily change in the very near future and is changing. So consumption is so personal nowadays that I think it's really impossible to like control any aspect of that um, on a government level. I think that people choose to see what they want to see, and the avenues in which they see it are so varied that I think it would just be something that's just impossible to reverse or scale back if we're talking about having like a literal solution to the amount of media violence. But I also think it's dangerous to be constantly exposed to things like war and um, school shootings. When that was something that Dr. Slade mentioned, I was thinking, you want to know when those things happen. I want to know when those things happen, but at the same time, I don't. And I don't want to see people running out of the school or bodies being moved out of the school because it's a tragedy, and I don't want to be desensitized to that tragedy. I want it to move me. I want it to be a big deal. I want it to be tragic. I don't want it to be so desensitized that that's something that's no longer tragic for me. So I think that it's really hard to find a balance. I'm personally consider myself like a really probably overly sensitive person, and so I really try to minimize what I'm exposed to in terms of violence and gore, even things that just cause me high anxiety, like crime shows do that for me. Even if there's no actual picture of, a dead body or blood or anything, it just negatively affects me and my anxiety. So it's something that I really try to limit in my life. And I feel like I benefit by creating those boundaries for myself. And so I think in terms of media violence, for us personally, I think it has to be a personal boundaries for consumption, because I don't think that there's anything that we can do ethically or otherwise to limit it. It's such an ingrained part of our society now, and especially with the amount of technology that we have and the potential sources for being exposed to media violence that we can come across on a day-to-day basis. So um, I think ethically there's a place for media violence. I find that place typically to be either within the realm of the news or maybe used in a theatrical or artistic way to teach lessons or to um, learn how to do better. But again, I think that there are so many moving parts to this, and I go back to the whole thing with audience. Like, my life and how violence plays a role in my life is totally different than someone else on the other side of the world, or even here in places where crime is more common. So those are my thoughts for this week, and I will keep up with you guys for this week 5. Thank you.